How's it going, y'all? Welcome back to this series. The thing about beginners that make them so unique is that, on one hand, they all start in the same spot. So we start at day one, knowing nothing, and progress from there. Another thing that makes them really unique as a category is just how much they're going to learn. The difference between someone who's been climbing 1 day versus 10 days versus 100 days is enormous. If we compare that to later on, if you take someone who's an intermediate climber who's been climbing 500 days, the difference between 500 days and 520 days may not be that huge of a difference. Hopefully it's some, but it might not be enormous. Where with beginners, every day we can learn a lot. On one hand, that can be really exciting, this idea of, I can learn constantly and keep picking up new things. On the other hand, it can be a little intimidating to say there is so much for me to gather, to learn, to understand. Where do I start? Where do I go with all of this? And that is what I'm hoping to help answer with this video today. I want to give y'all tools. Whenever you approach a climb, we only have what we bring to it. If you go up and you try something, you say, this holds small, or this move is big, and immediately you decide, I'm just going to go try something else because this is too challenging. I need to come back stronger or fitter. I'll just come back another time. If we do that all the time, you'll never send anything hard. So much of challenging climbing is finding something that feels really difficult, almost impossible. A lot of times they do feel impossible. And taking that and figuring out how to solve the puzzle. What tools, tactics, mindsets can you bring to this in order to break it down, to bring it to your level? And I think that's something that's absolutely fascinating about climbing. It's not just a matter of how do I get stronger in order to do this thing. There are so many ways that we can take these puzzles and turn them around and look at them and try and crack them open to make them work for us. If you don't know what the right tool for the job is, how are you going to use it? We can't utilize the correct methods if we don't know all of the methods, or at least most of them that are applicable to us in this moment. So that's this goal for this overall checklist is if you are in a specific category, I want to lay out, here are what I think are some really important tools for you to have in your toolkit so that when you approach climbs, you can kind of go through these and say, have I tried this? Is this something I need to be working on? Is this the problem? Rather than letting yourself get frustrated or becoming over-reliant on a single tool. I had mentioned earlier, with beginner climbers, everyone starts at day one and progresses from there. And that's a really unique thing. Because of that, we can kind of give a little more of a prescriptive approach. If someone is coming in for the very first time, you can say, here's some things that are useful for you. If they're coming in for the 10th time, you can give them things that are useful then. I think we can get away with that a little more now as beginners than we can later on in climbing. Because of that, unlike the rest of the checklists and the rest of this series, for the beginners, I've tried to list these chronologically and how you're going to encounter them. I will fully admit it's probably not perfect. I haven't been a beginner in many years. I still work with beginner climbers and I talk with them a lot. So I think this is close, but if it feels out of order to you and you want to skip ahead, or you feel like something early on is maybe too hard for you, it's okay. Just bounce around. Use this list how you feel works well for you. I've got 26 points on this list, which might sound like a lot. Wait till we get to the next chapters. With these 26 points, I'm going to elaborate on each one for anywhere from 10 seconds to about a minute, hopefully. I've got a few I'll probably spiral off on because it's me. In the future, I plan on coming back and making videos for most of these. Some of them are pretty self-explanatory and probably don't need a full video, but I think a lot of them would be great to take a full deep dive into and say, here's this one little point. Let's really dig into it for 10-15 minutes and kind of see just what there is to find out about it. So if you're watching this and as I'm going through these points, you see something where you're like, ooh, that's kind of neat. I want to know more about that. Leave a comment below. Tell me about it. And so I can prioritize that. Overall on my list between the 4 categories, I think I've got something like 210 bullet points, some of which could probably honestly be 10-part series just in their own. So if there's anything you think is important, feel free, let me know. I'll prioritize that up ahead. So for now, I'll just go ahead and get going into this list. Very first one I have on the list is go up. That may sound silly. It's kind of the classic trope of someone will get lost on a climb, can't figure out where to go. They're like, hey, does anyone have beta for here? Someone shouts, go up. Everyone laughs. It's great. Works every time. As a beginner is something that's useful to learn because it's easy to kind of get up to a spot. And if you feel stuck, you may instinctively just look all around you for what to do next. You look left, look right. You see this outside a lot. People will kind of feel stuck and they may just start traversing way off of the boulder problem or off the route. It's important to remember, in the end, we're probably going up. With sport climbs, go up also means follow the bolt line, most likely. When in doubt, move upwards. Very general advice, not always going to be perfectly true, but having that as your first default is helpful. The second item on the list is following the line. So this is kind of following the path of holds, rather than seeing a wall as just a smattering of grips and trying to work your way up it by any means, trying to figure out what is the path of least resistance. How do I follow that? Number 3 is identifying what is a handhold and what isn't. You can grab anything, but not all things are really that good. Being able to recognize what is a handhold, what's probably a foothold, the sooner you can do that, the better. Great way to do this, honestly, feel around. Feel things. Does that feel terrible? Yeah. Try bumping. Grab the next thing. Does that feel better? That's probably a hand. It takes a while to be able to recognize what is and isn't a hold. You know, climbing's new. It takes a bit to be able to look at a wall covered in features and recognize what is actually useful. Number 4 goes hand in hand with number 3, knowing when to bump off of holds or skip holds. So bump being hitting a hold and going again. And skipping holds, just not using some. A lot of times, especially on easier climbs, a wall may be really featured. So there's just going to be a ton of holds. And if you try and use absolutely everything, it might be exhausting. Also, some of them might just be bad. So recognizing when to skip holds to save energy is really useful. Number 5 is knowing how to grab holds in a way to where they're going to feel the best for you. I would call this level 1 route reading. If you look at a hold and there's chalk on it, typically where the chalk is, that's where it's going to feel best. We cover our hands in chalk whenever we climb. So wherever your hand goes, you're going to cover that part of the hold white. If you've been climbing for a while, this might seem obvious, but this is something that, especially with very large holds and big features, or if you're climbing outside, you can touch literally anything. Being able to spot the areas where there is just a little bit of chalk is incredibly useful and will save you so much time. Number 6 is go for it. I would call this level 1 try hard. It's not necessarily like, okay, I'm going to flex everything and try and rip the holds off the wall. It's just committing. It's saying, okay, I'm at this point. When I get here, I'm just going to go for the hold. Being able to have that level of commitment is really useful, and especially for beginner climbers. It's really normal that things just kind of feel clunky and weird, and you might just want to keep readjusting and hoping to find a better way that feels a little comfortable. There will be plenty of times where that will work out, but there's going to be so many times where you just kind of need to go for it. It's not going to feel comfortable because it's new. Climbing is new and unique. A lot of things just don't feel good until you've done them 100 times. Always try and find good ways to go, but if you hit a hard section and you just are regularly kind of running up against it, you're not quite able to figure out anything that feels perfect. If nothing you find feels good, try just going for it. See what happens. Number 7 is being able to differentiate between hold types. This means being able to look up at the wall and say, that's a pocket, that's a sloper, that's a jug, this is a side pull and undercling, kind of being able to spot holds and not only say, okay, I think this is where I should grab it, maybe based on the chalk, but knowing how it should feel generally. Good way to practice this, and I recommend this not just for indoors. If you go outside and you're climbing on a new rock type, man, walk at if you're at a cliff line, walk down at the base level. If you're on boulders, just walk around, touch holds, look at them, touch them, and just pay attention to how they feel. Different rock types will look visually so much different from each other. You can be a savant at sandstone, an expert at granite, but you might go to limestone and be like, I don't know what any of this is. I have no, it looks like there's nothing. And then you feel around a corner and you're like, there's pockets here. This is weird. Being able to read different rock types and in the gym, different hold types is incredibly helpful. It will make figuring your way out through boulder problems and routes so much easier. Number 8 is level 1 memory. Can you remember which hands, your lefts and rights, that you used for the crux, the hardest part of the climb? And also, can you just remember which hand you leave the start hold from? If you do those two things, you're going to check a lot of boxes. Being able to remember how you do the hardest part, super useful. Obviously, if you do it wrong, it's going to be even harder. But it's really easy to get overexcited about how you're going to do the crux. You run it through your head. You think about it a bunch. You go to pull on the start holds and immediately you lead with the wrong hand. I see this happen all the time, even with like intermediate, sometimes even slightly more advanced climbers. They'll get so hyper-focused on what's going on higher up in a climb that they start their sequence wrong. One of my favorite pieces of advice for this is whenever you're about to leave off the start holds, or if you're on a route, your rest hold, just remember I'm leading right hand or I'm leading left hand. And if you lead with the correct hand, the rest of the sequence tends to click into place for you pretty well. For number 9, this is knowing which part of your foot goes on the foothold. I think a lot of advice that beginners get is a little overly prescriptive, and frankly, I'm just not a fan of it. This is one piece of advice that I think is generally just good advice, and it's don't stand on the arch of your foot. I'm sure there are places where you can make it work, but it rarely ever works. Generally speaking, we want to use the front of our foot as well as the heel. Just avoid standing there. That can feel comfortable because the tip of your foot, that feels like a lot of weight. It's a lot of stress. Middle of your foot, especially as your foot gets tired, it feels good to put your arch on big holds. It's just going to backfire on you. It's not a skill that you can progress through the future. If it was, I'd be telling you, don't stand on the arch. Stand on your toes. Use your heels to pull on things. You do that, you're in good shape. Number 10 is breathe. And this is literally just do it. That's the entire advice for number 10. Just remember to breathe. A lot of us will kind of lock up when we try hard and stop breathing. You stop doing well for a lot of reasons when you're not breathing. Just breathe. Number 11 is knowing when it helps to match holds. Matching holds being bringing both hands together on the same hold before going to the next hold. There are times where this is super useful. A lot of brand new beginner climbers want to match on everything because it feels good. If you match a hold, it brings the next one kind of closer to you. It feels easier to reach. So they match everything. But if you match every hold, essentially you're doubling the number of moves you have to do every time you climb. That's exhausting. Don't do it. So knowing when a match is necessary and when you can just pull through to the next hold, very useful. Number 12 is beta memory. So this is level 2, beta memory for the full climb. Can you remember left hand, right hand for everything you do from the start hold to finish hold? It's that simple. Number 13 is this idea of cross-body balance. For some people, this is very fundamental and they just do it instinctually. So you might hear this and be like, yeah, duh, okay. For some people, they just don't realize this is a thing. Our body likes to find balance across of itself. Imagine you're going up a ladder. Or even whenever you're running. Whenever you run, when your right arm moves forward, your left leg moves forward. Same thing if you go up a ladder. Whenever your right arm and left leg are on the ladder, it feels balanced to move your left hand up. And then you do the same thing. So you'll bring your other leg up, so you have that cross-body balance, and move again. Being able to do this laddering with a cross-body balance is not going to solve every single move you ever do forever. A lot of times you have to do same side, right arm, right leg, or left arm, left leg. But more often than not, this is a good default to get comfortable with. 95% of the moves that you do will be cross-body balance. So, one hand, opposite leg, one hand, opposite leg whenever you're pulling through. Get used to it early and get comfortable with it. Make this a natural thing to where you don't even have to think about it, and you'll be good to go. Number 14 is level 3 beta memory. And these levels are just me saying them in order. Don't worry, this is not like no one's calling these levels. For this level of beta memory, can you remember what footholds you used for the crux? So at this point, we have all of our hands for the whole climb memorized. Can you also add in what footholds are you using for your lefts and rights for the crux sequence? Once again, do this, you'll be in good shape. While you could start from the very beginning, trying to memorize everything you do on every climb, I think that's a little unrealistic. It's a lot to focus on and a lot to remember. I think you're much better off just kind of adding these in layers. Thanks for joining me for the first half of the beginner's checklist. After listening to some feedback from y'all, I decided I would split this up into 2 parts. And same thing for all the further groupings. I'm going to split them apart so it's a little more digestible than one very long lecture. I'll see you next week with the next video.